Well, let's take a look now at how Latin American leaders are digesting developments in Caracas and in New York. Tim Vickery is our Brazil correspondent, and he joins me live now from Rio de Janeiro. Tim, good to speak to you as always. So let's get this sense then on how regional leaders are viewing events this Monday. And let's start where you are with the government in Brazil.
During the build-up of tension between Venezuela and the United States, Brazil kept very, very quiet. And there was no immediate reaction after those stunning developments on Saturday morning. President Lula of Brazil did then condemn what had happened. And on Sunday, there was a joint declaration together with Chile, Colombia, Uruguay, Mexico and Spain, condemning what has happened as a dangerous precedent. It's a relatively weak document, though, in that it doesn't mention either Trump or Maduro by name. In a short period of time, Brazil will take this condemnation to the United Nations Security Council, where one would imagine that China and Russia will be in support of any condemnation of the US activities, but obviously there's a US veto, and so nothing is going to come out of that. But certainly these heads of state think it's important to draw a line and say that what has happened is unacceptable. It's also unprecedented. The United States did act to separate Panama from Colombia right at the start of the 20th century in order to build that canal. But Panama is technically Central America. An operation like this in South America has never happened before from the United States.
And look, there have been some rather thinly veiled threats from Donald Trump towards other Latin American leaders, suggesting perhaps they could face a similar fate to Maduro. Talk to us then, Tim, about Colombia and perhaps as well about Cuba.
Well, I think they're very, very different cases here. And Cuba is certainly a dream of the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who comes from the Cuban Miami, Florida diaspora. And that's a long-term dream. And the long-term future of the Cuban regime doesn't seem particularly secure. Colombia is a different case entirely. Colombia is the most populous country in South America after Brazil. And President Petro there, you're seeing, he cannot be re-elected, and the elections in Colombia are in the middle of this year. So one would imagine, and it has become very, very difficult to predict the next steps from the United States regime, but you would imagine that their priority would be to use US influence at the ballot box in the electoral process. That was very much what happened last year in Argentina, for example, where Donald Trump's government is effectively propping up the administration of President Milei, and also in Honduras, where, and this really gives a lie to the idea that this is about narco-trafficking, the ex-president of Honduras, Hernandez, serving a long term in the United States jail for drug smuggling, was pardoned in order to give a boost to the right wing before those elections in Honduras. So you would imagine in Colombia it will be an electoral strategy. But, behind the scenes, even in these right-wing countries in South America, like Argentina, there are one or two misgivings about what is happening. Firstly, because the rhetoric coming out of Donald Trump is so blatantly a resource grab, the talk about oil, not talk about democracy. And secondly, because Donald Trump has wasted no time at all in throwing Maria Corina Machado under the bus. Useful for the United States for propaganda purposes, the campaign for her, the oppositionist in Venezuela, to win the Nobel Peace Prize. But as soon as there was any talk of regime change, Trump said that she doesn't have the support or the respect in Venezuela, and she doesn't seem to be a player at the moment. So even some of the conservative forces in South America are having a look at that and taking notes.
And Tim, just a final question for you, and a bit of history, if you can. Trump officials talking about the Monroe Doctrine in the past 48 hours, that an update of the 19th century Monroe Doctrine. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, that was 1823, President Monroe, just as the Spanish Empire was crumbling and the Spanish were being kicked out of South America. They kept hold of Cuba for a while later. In 1823, the President of the United States declared America for the Americas. What he was saying there was no imperialist European powers to have boots on the ground in the Americas. Effectively, that means our backyard. Now, as recently as 2013, the then Secretary of State, John Kerry, declared that the Monroe Doctrine was dead. It's emphatically very, very much back, with the United States pivoting away from maybe Europe and Asia and the Middle East as prime foreign policy areas and moving towards a renewed emphasis on Latin America. Now, the circumstances now are very different from those of 200 years ago. The main threat that the United States are seeing, not the European powers, China. China, which is has the influence of China has grown and grown in Latin America. It is a major trading partner, the biggest trading partner of many of the South American countries. So it's possible that we're looking at a double game here from what the United States is doing. As we've just been hearing, fair enough, the emphasis on oil, but it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of investment in order for those oil reserves to be gettable, to be refinable, to be profitable. So that's a long-term game, perhaps. In the short-term game, a message, a powerful message has been sent to China. Latin America is America's, North America's, the USA's sphere of influence, and we can do what we want there, and you'll just have to take it. That would seem to be part of what the United States government is trying to do.
All right. Tim Vickery, our correspondent there in Rio de Janeiro, thank you very much indeed.